What's up, Rebel Nation? It's Cam Wicker from the Rebel Walk, co-host of the podcast that you're tuned into right now, the Rebel Talk. In today's episode, Zach and I will be breaking down women's basketball, men's basketball, and baseball from the past week here at Ole Miss. The podcast will be broken down into 3 sections, allowing you to skip through or watch the whole thing. Also, we will be getting back to you guys with football during the midweek as spring practice started here in Oxford. With that being said, leave a like on this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and enjoy the show. Welcome back, Rebel fans. You're listening to another episode of the Rebel Talk presented by the Rebel Walk. I'm Cam Wicker, and as always, I'm here with Zach Mareth. And today we're here to talk a little bit about the past week in Ole Miss sports, back with another weekly recap, just as always. Going to talk a little bit of women's basketball, men's basketball, baseball. Also, don't forget, spring football starts tomorrow here in Oxford. They'll be practicing about twice a week as far as media showing. We'll be able to go on Tuesday, see their practices, talk with coach, talk with some players, talk with players on Thursday, throughout the week, throughout the spring practices, pretty much all throughout the spring. But we won't talk too much football today. We'll talk more football when we do the features for the position groups and stuff like that. And we'll give you guys some updates about practices along the way there. So just keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for football. It's getting close. I mean, 2024 season just ended not too long ago. A crazy season for Ole Miss, and it seems like it's right around the corner, a new era for Ole Miss football at this point. But right away, we're just going to hop into a little women's basketball. And the big question for me is Team 50 playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder now? Because, I mean, the selection show yesterday didn't really go how you wanted it to go. I mean, I had that feeling in my chest, Zach, that when Baylor popped up on the screen as a 4 seed after being a 5 seed in Charlie Cream's bracketology for most of the last month of February and March, it seemed like Ole Miss was going to slip into that 5 spot. When they showed Ole Miss on the screen at 5, kind of a little bit of air kind of came out the building for a second there. There were some cheers. Maddie Scott gets up and saying they're going to pack the defense with them, and it seemed like this team has a little bit of a chip on their shoulders. Zach, what do you think?
I think in a weird way, I think this is something you can kind of look back on and maybe think it was for the best, Cam. Obviously, I'll be the first one to tell you, for women's basketball to host a playoff game, it would have been electric. It would have been everything Coach Yo would have wanted, from the Oxford fan base. But unfortunately, just not the reality. And again, if you look at one of the biggest wins of the season, Ole Miss goes to Baton Rouge on the road. So there's really no problem, no concern for me of them playing on the road. It's not like they were, the best home team ever this year. I understand, obviously the fan base wants to be at the game. I get that, like I said. But look, man, it's an opportunity to really be one game on the road against Baylor, and then you kind of move into, whatever region and all those different locations and stuff along those lines. So, you go there. Now you got a chip on your shoulder, like you said. You take care of business, and then you move forward. But look, it starts with Ball State. I feel like Chris Beard. Like we got to start with the first game, get the first game. But honestly, like Ball State, they beat Texas A&M. They beat an SEC team, not the best SEC team, but they still did. And then they lost pretty badly to North Carolina and Ohio State early in the year. So they've shown they're pretty vulnerable against elite teams. But I think the key for me for Ole Miss is going to be to keep them below 65 points because, like Maddie Scott said, it's going to be about packing your defense when you're on the road, when you're in, a hostile environment, when you're in an environment where you can't mess up this game. You can't lose or the season's over. That starts with on the defensive end and generating that into some offensive momentum. But again, I bring us back to the main point, Cam. You were in the building. Just your thoughts and overall reactions and impressions to Ole Miss getting ranked 5.
Absolutely. And back a little bit before I start on that, if you guys want to check out, I had a little feature article on what Maddie Scott kind of said and what Coach O had to say after that selection show came out on the rebelwalk.com, I think early this morning. It's about defense and joy and then packing that into their March Madness trip. And you can go check that out on the rebelwalk.com. But yeah, Zach, I mean, it seemed like I said earlier, kind of some air came out of that building when Ole Miss popped up as 5. There were some cheers. There were a lot of people that maybe not even realized that Ole Miss wasn't hosting, and it was like, oh, okay, they showed our name on the screen, so here we go. But that was it for Ole Miss, and you could tell the look. I mean, Coach Yo kind of denied it just a little bit, but she did say that there was some envy there when Ole Miss popped up on that 5 spot. But there was a look on Maddie Scott's and Coach Yo's face specifically when they showed Ole Miss as 5 on that board, and it looked like okay, we got snubbed and we have something to prove now. And I think that is what this Ole Miss team is going to bring with them into Waco in the regional. But I want to talk about, how did Ole Miss not get the host spot? I mean, if you're looking at
Sure.
the statistics, if you're looking at the simple facts, like Coach Joe put it yesterday, 12th in the net for Ole Miss, third strength of schedule, ranked 25 and ranked 25th in the AP, wins over number 7 and number 8 in the final month. I mean, you brought the 1 seed and the 2 seed in this tournament in UT, and did that to UT twice, did it to Texas twice, down to the wire at one point. You got 6 Q1 wins, 1 bad loss against A&M earlier in the year. Average margin of defeat is only 7.5, and you got 10 losses. I mean, it's 10 losses. You're losing by single digits every time in those losses. And then you look at Baylor on the other hand, 15th in the net, 41st strength of schedule, 3 losses to 2 seed TCU, 23-point loss to the 7 seed OK State, a loss to 9 seed Indiana, a loss to 10 seed Oregon, only 3 Q1 wins, and an average margin of defeat 9.7.
I didn't even realize how kind of ridiculous that is.
It's kind of ridiculous when you look at it, and
Yeah.
Coach said it best yesterday. When you put people in a room and there's opinions that matter, things go a little differently. And I'm not saying that it went like this, or maybe there was a Baylor fan in the committee. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that it could have been a situation where you look at Baylor and you look at Ole Miss and you see Baylor as a story basketball program. And you look at Ole Miss and you're saying, oh, okay, this is not a story program yet. They're not a blue blood. They're on the way up. But if you look at the stats and the facts, it seemed to me that Ole Miss deserved that host spot. But at the end of the day, it didn't work out like that, and you move on to Ball State. And like Zach said, this is going to be a tough Ball State team. I mean, this is a Ball State team that is going to play defense. They have the MAC Defensive Player of the Year. They have the MAC Player of the Year. They have the MAC Coach of the Year. I mean, it's a really good Ball State team that you're going up against. And, I mean, you're going to have to bring your A game.
That's it, Cam. And again, it starts with that first game. Hopefully Ole Miss goes in and limits them to under 65. Like I said, we get the ball in the hands of our scorers. Kennedy Todd Williams is scoring a little bit. KK Deans, Maddie Scott really takes that leadership role during another March Madness run for her here at Ole Miss. So you kind of have to look for that sort of leadership early. And I think it starts against Ball State. You got to go out there and dominate and carry that momentum, because you're likely going to be playing Baylor on the road, like we said, which there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, chip on the shoulder. It's an opportunity. And it feels like it's a similar theme for a lot of the Ole Miss teams across campus. All these teams are going to look a lot different next year, and this includes the women's basketball team. So you hope that, with the veteran presence and experience, they can do some damage here.
Absolutely. And like Zach said, it's a veteran presence on this Ole Miss team. A lot of these players aren't going to be here next year. Coach Joe's got a lot of freshmen sitting on that bench this year that she's rotated in some games that she's going to hope that's going to improve next year and be in that starting lineup with Sierra Chinu. But similar with Ball State. Ball State has 7 seniors, 1 freshman in their rotation. This is a veteran team that Ole Miss can't sleep on, because I mean, it's an easy road, it looks like, to the Final Four for Ole Miss. But Ball State is where it starts. And just like Zach said earlier, it sounded like Chris Beard, but Ball State is where it starts. Before I move on to men's basketball, I want to talk a little bit just about the road for Ole Miss to the Final Four. They're in that Waco Regional against Ball State. They'll play the winner of Baylor and Grand Canyon. If they beat Ball State, on the top half of that bracket is this Regional 1 Spokane bracket. UCLA is waiting the winner of the first 4 play-in game, and then the 8-9 seed Richmond and Georgia Tech. So, I mean, you might play UCLA, you might play Georgia Tech or Richmond, depending on an upset there. And then at the bottom half of that bracket, if you end up making it past UCLA or whoever you end up playing in the Elite Eight, if you get there, there's a possible rematch against LSU or NC State. And if you're an Ole Miss fan, I think you could feel really good about that. I mean, I know you went to NC State and it didn't look so good earlier in the year, but it's going to be a neutral matchup if you face off this time, and then you can beat LSU. So there's good things to look ahead towards for Ole Miss women's basketball on Team 50. And like I said, like I put out in that article earlier today, it's going to start with defense. It's going to start with their motto, joy, and that mentality that they bring to the table. And we're going to see what Ole Miss does in that little run here in March Madness. Moving on to the men's basketball side of things, also going dancing, 6th seed. They got that projected 6th seed spot like they expected. I mean, there was a chance maybe, Zach, that you thought they were a 5 seed. But I think the big question is for Ole Miss is, do they have the toughest first-round matchup?
It's interesting, Cam. And here's the thing. We're going to find out a lot tomorrow night. So I kind of want to give the perspective here. We'll start with this. North Carolina should not be in the NCAA tournament. For those who don't know, it's not sure why the NCAA does this, but the North Carolina athletic director is the head of the college basketball committee selection for March Madness. So we need to stop with the athletic directors. I mean, can you imagine if Keith Carter was running the show? I'd be like, yeah, it's
He's a basketball guy.
yeah, I'd be like, okay, like Ole Miss's top 3 seed. I don't care what they do. But then the best part to me was they brought this guy on TV to break down why North Carolina should be in the tournament. And he goes, oh, yeah, I left the room. So my buddy here is going to tell you what. What? What do you mean you left the room? Like, dude, the whole situation's ridiculous to me. But look, now they're in. It's North Carolina. They're a big brand. They're going to play San Diego State. And the winner of that game is going to play Ole Miss. So for me, I would prefer to play North Carolina. Look, they're very guard heavy. I know they have a lot of veterans on that team, but they were 1-12 against quad 1 opponents. Their one win was against UCLA, who I believe is a 7 seed. So their resume, it's horrible. I'll put it lightly for you guys. It's really not great. So when you play a team against Ole Miss, who's been through absolute hell in the regular season, playing a seemingly a ranked opponent every single week, I think they would be more prepared for that. And then San Diego State, look, they got 2 big men who stand out to me. They got a 7-foot freshman and a 6'10" senior who are both averaging over 5 rebounds per game. So when you have guys who are physical like that and guys who are simply taller and lengthier than a lot of the Ole Miss players, I tend to want to avoid that. And when you look at, the teams with big front courts like Auburn and Mississippi State, those are guys that Ole Miss struggled against, to put it, simply. Couldn't beat them. Couldn't beat Auburn 3 times, couldn't beat State twice. And a lot of that starts with what goes on down low. So I would prefer North Carolina. I think Ole Miss would be able to win both of these games. But we're going to get a first look, obviously, tomorrow night. I believe that game will go down. And then Friday afternoon in Milwaukee. Interesting location, but hey, it's good. We're here for it, Cam. But I want to get your thoughts on, not only our seeding, but kind of this first round matchup as well.
Absolutely. And like Zach said, kind of shocking that UNC's in that first 4 out. A lot of people are upset about 14 SEC teams being in the tournament, but 14 SEC teams in the tournament could probably beat UNC. No disrespect if any UNC fans are watching, but that's just facts. Like Zach said, the only big win for UNC all season was UCLA. San Diego State has some big wins. They beat 1 seed Houston early in the season. They beat a 9-seeded Creighton by 18 points in that game, and that was like middle of the year. Creighton's looked good. Creighton looked good down the stretch in their conference tournament. But it's kind of hard to say what I'm really thinking about this first round matchup for Ole Miss, because I really do think you probably have the toughest road to making a run at this thing, because even if you win this next round, you face an Iowa State team that's really streaky. They can get hot. They can lose to anybody, kind of similar to Ole Miss in a way throughout the SEC play this year. You lose to anybody, you can beat anybody. I feel like Iowa State's that same way. But if you can get past Iowa State, then you have to play Michigan State. And then if you get past Michigan State, you have to play Auburn. So, I mean, it's going to be a tough road for Ole Miss if you're trying to make a run. But one thing I wanted to highlight here was a guy from CBS earlier today said that Ole Miss was frauds. And it's hard to say. I mean, a lot of people probably say that, and I'm sure a lot of people in the fan base probably say that Ole Miss was fraudulent at times this year. But this is an SEC. This is a conference that is one of the toughest in the country, probably second to none, really. I take that back. It is second to none, really, in basketball, and it has been all year. So I think the SEC is going to show their strength in this tournament, and I think Ole Miss has a really good chance at making a run, either to face Michigan State and hopefully make a run at Auburn in the next round.
Dude, I mean, and if you can get Auburn, in my opinion, I think Ole Miss maybe beats them if they don't shoot 17% from the 3-point line in Nashville. Weird things happen in March, Cam, but yeah, I want to touch on that briefly, the Chris Beard interaction. He was asked about, being called frauds. And at first, like a lot of coaches, he said, I have no comment on that. And then someone else is asking him a question. He interrupts the question and just goes on an absolute tangent about the Ole Miss resume, about the SEC. And then to close things off, when the cameras turned off, after the interview, he said, "Frauds, huh?" And basically laughed off as he walked across the stage. So you could tell this is now in his brain. I guarantee you he's going to use it as bulletin board material, which isn't a bad thing for Ole Miss to actually really like that. But he's going back to Milwaukee. I mentioned it earlier. Saw this on Twitter. I feel like I should be giving credit to this guy. It's a really cool stat. But Ole Miss, when Chris Beard coached at Texas, he actually played a March Madness game in Milwaukee and beat Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's point guard was Sean Padula. So really cool for now they're going back to Milwaukee on the same side. They both have experience in that city in March Madness. I do like that for the Rebs. But Iowa State is another matchup. So let's say, for example, Ole Miss advances to round 2. They're missing Keyshawn Gilbert, who's basically their best scorer on the team. I believe he has one of the highest three-point percentages. But 6'4" guard, really versatile. Obviously, that would help Ole Miss's case. But we've talked about, Iowa State is a very competitive program, a very good team. They've had a great year. And, I sound like Beard. I'm say it once again, but it starts with that round 1 matchup before you can even look to Sunday. And then the last thing I got here, Cam, is what are we doing with flight prices across the country right now? Being from Chicago, I looked Memphis to Chicago for the round trip, and I think it was like $600. I'm like, guys, college student, I mean, what are we doing? Maybe I'm just out of the loop. Maybe I understand, the economy of United Airlines, but damn, that's a lot of money.
Absolutely. Get you a Capital One venture card if you're trying to get flights nowadays, because that's really the only way you can do it. It's not the COVID prices anymore for flights. But that's really all we got for college basketball this week. I mean, Beard said he's never played a play-in opponent, so that'll be a first thing for Beard. Or depending on the winner of UNC and San Diego State, that game is on tomorrow. Is tomorrow night at 8 p.m. If you want to tune in and do a little bit of scouting for that game and see what Ole Miss is going to have to look out for. But one thing I do want to leave you guys with is, how is Kentucky a 3 seed in this tournament? And does Ole Miss have what it takes to make a run? So, I mean, answer those 2 things for me, and maybe leave some comments down below, leave some comments on social media about that. But, yeah, we're going to move in a little bit to baseball now. Tough week for Ole Miss on the diamond. I mean, not the showing that you wanted heading into SEC play. Losing in the midweek to South Alabama, and just, we won't talk too much about that one, Zach. I mean, that one was kind of a rough one in the midweek, not one that you expected Ole Miss to lose. I think we're on like a 13, 14-game win streak at that point, and then all of a sudden you drop that game to South Alabama heading into SEC play. But then Ole Miss wins on Friday, gives the fan base a little bit of hope, shakes things up, and it seemed like they were going to make some noise this week. I mean, Hunter Elliott looked great on Friday night. Leadoff bomb on the first SEC pitch he ever sees for Hayden Federico. Mitchell Sanford and Humphrey looked great on Friday night. Sanford kind of looked probably the best hitter all weekend for Ole Miss. I mean, Luke Chang at shortstop looked great. He seemed like he finally got the bat going. Then he takes a pitch off the cheek, breaks his little flap on the cheek there. He's got a swollen cheek. Coach says he's in concussion protocol until the next week. So, I mean, Ole Miss eventually shuts the door with Morris and Spencer. Arkansas was trying to score some runs there. They got some really good bats. What are your overall thoughts on just that win on Friday, Zach?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the South Alabama thing, because when I was working the tournament in Nashville, the basketball tournament, I was sitting next to a really cool guy, Trey Wallace. I think he works for Fox Sports, but, good Twitter following, whatever. So we're talking, and I'm like, oh, where'd you go to college? Oh, well, yeah, Trey went to South Alabama. So that was cool. Rather embarrassing moment, but look, it's all right. Midweek game, I guess we're going to scratch it. So moving into the weekend, Cam said Friday was great. I'm just going to say it how it is. The bullpen is a problem, and it makes me feel bad, because a lot of it you really couldn't control with the amount of guys that got in the transfer portal. Wes Mendez was essentially supposed to be a starter, which would have bumped Maddox or Nichols into the bullpen. That would have been a huge piece. You talk about Liam Doyle, you talk about Saunier, JT Quinn, all these guys who were potential starters and would have created a lot more depth in the bullpen that Ole Miss doesn't have. Ryan Rodriguez, for example, who I think does have a high ceiling. He's in a much bigger role this year than he was last year because of that depth. And we saw that firsthand on Sunday, I was in the press box, and it looked like Ole Miss had, a really good start to the game. Obviously, I think it was 4-0. And then Nichols comes out, freshman Walker Hooks comes in, who he's a freshman coming in a high leverage situation. He gives up some runs. And then the guy for me who, I think he'd be the first one to tell you he had a poor outing, is Braden Jones, and he's going to really make or break some games down the stretch. You need to have that guy, like how Mason Morris does on Friday, the guy who can come in after the starter on Saturday or Sunday and get those innings, those 6, 7, 8 to the ninth. You know what I mean? But again, Braden Jones had a very, very poor outing, and it put Ole Miss in a bad spot and ultimately won Arkansas the game. And then the thing in the field here, Owen Pano is really struggling. Obviously, he's a freshman. He could be in the minor leagues right now at a spring training site somewhere. He has that much potential, but it's not translating. So I do think a change needs to be made. And if Luke Chang is still injured, maybe you shift Hill back to shortstop, put Braden Randall at second. But unfortunately, Owen Pano is, he's got, I want to say, a fielding percentage around 865, which doesn't really cut it in the SEC. And I hate talking about this because Owen is going to be a stud one day. But right now he really is struggling. And then in right field, Mitch Sanford, he kind of struggles with balls off the bat, Cam, just getting a good read. So I don't know if you need to move Mowerman to right field and put Federico in left, but I think it's worth looking at some defensive adjustments, because if Pano makes a play in the ninth inning and Mitch Sanford reads the ball off the bat and makes a play in right field also in the ninth inning, they win the game. Like, it's that simple. Connor Spencer still has a 0 ERA because all his wow, I can't talk. Words are hard, guys. All the runs that he's given up are unearned. So that's a problem with the defense. It's got to get better. I thought hitting was great, but we're still in March. It's very early, and I think you need to go to Mizzou and hopefully handle business. But before that, I think we even play Southern Miss this weekend. So, we'll see. But for you, what needs to change moving forward?
Absolutely. And like you said, Zach, I mean, the fielding right now is a bit of a problem for Ole Miss, and not as much as a problem it was the past 2 seasons. I mean, if you watched Ole Miss baseball the past 2 seasons, the fielding was probably one of the worst in the country. It seemed at times like Ole Miss had trouble just getting in out at some points. But you don't see that as much this year with Ole Miss. It seems like they figured out the infield somewhat. Like Zach said, you maybe want to see if Luke Hill can move back over to shortstop. He's looked great at second base. He's looked great at times at third base. Maybe Luke Hill's ready to go back to short. That's probably where he's going to play once he gets drafted into the majors. He'll probably play shortstop in the middle of the infield, maybe second base, depending on who he gets drafted by. Luke Hill's going to get drafted. He's got a great bat. I really don't know what to say about Pano right now. I mean, you're hoping that it's a Gray Kessinger situation where freshman year's not going to work out for him, and it's just going to look like this all year. He's going to have some development. He's going to have some offseason work. He's going to come back next year batting 300 like Gray Kessinger did. You're hoping that's the case when it comes to Pano, and I think the ceiling is that high. I think the ceiling for Pano is much higher than the ceiling was for Gray Kessinger at that point when Gray Kessinger was at Ole Miss. So you're just hoping that maybe eventually sometime in the season that Pano comes along. If not, you probably have to settle in with Luke Chang at short. If not, move Luke Hill over there. And then obviously, like he said, with Mitchell Sanford seeming to have some hard reads off the ball. He's got legs, man. I mean, Mitchell Sanford might be one of the fastest guys on this team.
Yeah.
He makes up a lot of ground. He has a great arm in the outfield. Every one of the guys that they got in the outfield have great arms. But it seems like out of the 3, and then with Federico joining as well, as far as the glove work and the reads, Mitchell Sanford might be the worst of the 4. So, I mean, like Zach said, you maybe move Moorman over to right. Maybe you move Federico into right. Humphrey seems to have found his place in center field. He seems like he's an all-around guy out there. Not the fastest guy, but he seems like he's just got some great glove work out there. But the fielding is where it starts for Ole Miss. And then the bottom half of the lineup, I mean, I know it's starting to come along a little bit more. You're seeing Farley get his batting average up a little bit. Farley's getting home runs. He's driving runs in. Furness is coming up in big moments like he did on Sunday to tie the game up. But it's still at points where the bottom of the lineup is going 0 for 3, 0 for 4. You got 2-3 strikeouts from some guys, and it's just not working at times at the bottom of that lineup. And I like what I saw out of Mike Bianco this past weekend, where he put Humphrey down there in that 7-8 spot throughout the weekend on the Friday game and on the Sunday game, and it seemed to work. I mean, if a guy like Isaac Humphrey, that's a veteran, that's willing to go down to the bottom of the lineup, that says a lot about him and his character. That says a lot about Bianco wanting to do this thing, seeing that the problem is there and trying to fix it. And that's what Humphrey being in the bottom of that lineup said for Ole Miss, in my opinion. And I think the big thing moving forward is just getting that fielding down, you can't really do much about the bullpen debt. You're going to have, like Zach said, you're going to have to get some big outings out of Braden Jones at some point and hope that guys like Walker Hooks, Ryan Rodriguez, the development comes along with them throughout the season with more innings. Connor Spencer's looking great out the back of the bullpen. Mason Morris is looking great for him. This pitching staff has looked a lot better for Ole Miss than the past 2 seasons with Joe Mangrum at the helm. It seemed like, at the beginning of the season, it seemed like Ole Miss was kind of iffy at times, but the walks are down. It seems like, when you look at the box score, every pitcher has like 2 walks to 8 strikeouts, at least the starters, at least. So, where Joel Mangrum has this pitching staff at right now, it's a really good spot for Ole Miss. I think the big thing is the fielding and the bottom of the lineup.
And piggybacking off Cam here, I think the starters really showed out. Like Arkansas, these boys can hit. Let me tell you. You want to look at those batting averages on the scoreboard. If you were at Swayze over the weekend, there's no easy out there. Hunter Elliott goes 5, strikes out 8, 2 earned runs. Maddox, who, by the way, should not have gotten pulled, in my opinion. I think he threw 68 pitches. I know he gave up 3 earned runs, but still, it looked like he had a little more in the tank. But still, I still thought it was a decent outing against a really, really good Arkansas team. And then Nichols gets a pretty gritty outing with 4.2 innings pitched, 5 strikeouts, and 1 earned run, who maybe he could have gone 1 or 2 more batters, but a rally was kind of picking up for Arkansas. But, moral of the story is that these 3 guys can compete with the best of the best, and I think they're really going to have to throw at least 80 pitches to really, connect this bullpen together because it's light. It's light. And I don't like saying that. I wish it was deep. I wish there were guys who, didn't throw because we were that good. But that's not the reality. So the starters are going to have to take on a bigger role moving forward. On some of these freshmen like Cade Townsend, Taylor Rabe, they're going to have to step up and develop and really grow quickly as we get further into SEC play.
Absolutely. And I seen Cade Townsend warm up down in the bullpen on Sunday. They went to, I believe they went to Braden Jones at that time when both of those guys were up. So Cade Townsend seems to be getting at least some attention out of Mangrum and Lafferty in the bullpen to go into some high leverage situations. They have high hopes for Townsend. He was a top 150 prospect, I believe, top 200 prospect. They have hopes for this kid. And like Zach said, the development is just all you're hoping for right now in that situation. Moving on to what we're going to see in the future for Ole Miss baseball. They're going to be, like Zach said, they're going to be playing Southern Miss in the midweek. That'll be tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, I believe. 6 o'clock p.m. against number 19 Southern Miss. Ole Miss dropped to 18th in the latest D1 baseball ranking. So another ranked matchup between Ole Miss and Southern Miss. The rematch, I believe it was 15-8. A lot of home runs in that last game in Oxford that these two played in that. I think it was the first midweek game of the season, I believe, second midweek game of the season after the Arkansas State one. So another big matchup for Ole Miss. Last time Southern Miss played one of those played a Mississippi team. They played Mississippi State, and I think they lost 18-3. Mississippi State hasn't looked great this year, so Ole Miss at this point, you probably got to take this game just for, I guess, the way the resume looks. You're hoping that you take this game and you got 2 solid wins against a ranked USM team. So, you're hoping you take that game on Tuesday. And I think Ole Miss can go 4-0 this week. And that's the big question for me, 4-0 this week. You're playing a Missouri team that is probably no doubt the worst team in the SEC. Sorry to any Missouri fans out there if you're watching. 8-11 on the year, 0-3 in the SEC. It hasn't looked good. Competitive play this past weekend against the number 1 team in the country in LSU. I think LSU dropped down to 2 because Tennessee's 20-0 now on the year, so LSU dropped to 2 on that. But LSU did sweep Missouri this past weekend. A couple competitive games there. Missouri has some pretty good batters in that lineup with Jackson Lovich playing shortstop, batting .324. He has 3 home runs on the year, does not walk a ton. He swings the bat a lot. He's only got 3 walks on the season. They got senior outfielder Caden Nicoletto batting .392. He's only got 14 games played, though, so that's not the team high because he doesn't have the at-bats as Lovich has. And then catcher, sophomore Mateo Serna batting .286. He leads the team with 4 home runs. They don't hit a lot of home runs. I believe they only had like 23 on the year so far, but Serna drives in a lot of runs. He's got 20 on the year. That's the same amount, I believe, as Judd Utermark, who leads the team for Ole Miss. Or I think Mormon leads the team for Ole Miss a little bit more than that. But Utermark, comparison there to Serna with the 20 RBIs. And then for the rotation for them, they'll have Ian Loesch On Friday, Saturday, they'll have Will Lever, and Sunday, Caden Drew. All those guys, the ERAs aren't really good. Obviously, Missouri's lost a pretty good amount of games early in this season. But those guys, they have confidence in those guys. They've stayed at those guys all year. It doesn't seem like they switched up that rotation. And they got some good guys out of the bullpen with Caden Jacoby and Brock Lucas and Ben Smith. Those three guys just seem to be the staples out of the bullpen for them, eating up a lot of innings for them out of the bullpen. So expect to see those guys at some point this weekend when Ole Miss plays those games. And I'm expecting a gritty matchup. A gritty game, some gritty, at least first game, depending on how that goes for Missouri. They're going to come in hungry, seeing that Ole Miss lost their opening series, and they're going to try to steal one at home in Columbia, Zach.
You have to win two here. This is a bad – they're not bad. I don't like saying that. But for the SEC and the teams that you're going to be facing later down the road, whether it's Florida, a pretty solid Vandy team, Tennessee – going on the road to state is always just an absolute nightmare. So you need to take these series while they're available. There's one right in front of the Rebs in Columbia. And like you said, another really good opportunity to boost the resume against Southern Miss. So a huge week for Ole Miss baseball, in addition to huge week for men's and women's basketball.
Absolutely. And I like going back to what I said a little bit earlier, team ERA for Missouri, listen to this, Zach, 6.83. The next closest is the 15th in the 15th spot in the SEC is Georgia, and theirs is a 4.8. So, 2 runs different for the ERA for Missouri as a team ERA. They're 193rd nationally in ERA. So if you're Ole Miss this weekend, there's no excuse why you shouldn't go 3-0 and get the sweep. Obviously, you need to, but this is a big weekend for Ole Miss. You play Florida after that at home. Florida's not easy. I know they just got swept by Tennessee, but like I said a minute ago, Tennessee's 20-0. So Tennessee looks unbeatable right now. So you're heading into next weekend against a really good Florida team. If you can get 3 this weekend, if you can get the midweek game and go 4-0, that's the big question for me. Can Ole Miss go 4-0 this week and get some momentum going into the next week and getting ready to face Florida and getting really into the heart of the SEC?
100%, Cam. This is, again, man, you're not going to get a lot of these playing in the SEC, so you really got to maximize it. Take the time to hopefully get hot. If you're a hitter, get hot and carry that momentum into the rest of these series as we move forward in SEC play. But, really the last thing I got here is I'm curious, for all the people watching this, who you guys have winning March Madness. For me, I want to pick Florida, Cam, but I also am struggling to not pick against Duke because with Cooper Flagg in the rotation, those boys can play, man. They don't have a starter under 6'6". The hell is that about? It's not even fair, man. But I'm curious, Cam, before we go, who do you got right now, bro?
I've made a couple brackets, a handful of the men's brackets and a handful of the women's brackets. The bias me is putting the women's bracket Ole Miss pretty much all the time in the Final Four. I got UConn winning a lot of those. I got USC winning a lot of those. I don't think South Carolina is going to win it. If I see anybody out of the SEC in that women's side, I think Texas wins the whole thing. But as far as the men's side, I got one that maybe not a lot of people are picking right now. They're hot. They got one of the best coaches in the country, one of the most legendary coaches in the country. I got the St. John Johnnies going all the way this year. And shout out to my man John. He's been on the St. John Johnnies all year. I think St. John's got a really good chance. Like Zach said, I think Florida's got a really good chance. No hate towards Auburn, no bad thing towards Auburn, but I have a feeling that teams like Auburn, teams like Duke might get dropped in that second, third round. Just because, high leverage spots, you got teams that are ranked lower that are just hungry, and matchups are what it's all about in March. And if you get a bad matchup and you're a top seed, there's really nothing you can do about it. And we'll have to see how this really unfolds here going into March, but it's going to be an exciting one. I think that's all we got for you guys, though. Ole Miss will be back in Swayze at baseball on March 25th. It's going to be a good while from now. You're going to have to wait a little while for some Ole Miss baseball. No sports really at all. No major sports at all this weekend for Ole Miss at home. Obviously, men's and women's will be playing on Friday in the tournament. You'll have to keep an eye out for that. Ball State for the women, and then UNC or San Diego State for the men's. And then, like we said, Missouri this coming up weekend for baseball. But I think that's all we got for you guys this week. We'll see you guys in the midweek talking a little bit about football after we get some little watch time on the spring practice and talking with Lane Kiffin and some of the new players, new faces. We're returning players for Ole Miss football. But that's all we got for you guys. Make sure to subscribe to the Rebel Walk YouTube channel. Like this video to keep up with the pod. Subscribe to me and Zach on all social media. Subscribe to the Rebel Walk on social media. And with that being said, thanks for tuning in, and check out the rebelwalk.com for all your Ole Miss sports needs.